now.
Okay, we are back with the live stream here, and although I did actually have a few technical challenges getting this thing started, I'm reasonably optimistic that we'll be able to keep the show on the road as we move forward in the live stream today. So just a real quick update in case you're new to live streams. You can leave a question either straight down below or on the side, just depends on what type of device you are using, and I will do my best to answer your questions. It is an Ask Me Anything show, so you can ask me anything. No guarantees you'll like my answer or that I'll even be capable of providing an answer, but I'll do my best, and that seems to be the name of the game. And as this little image up here, just as a quick reminder, try to use the @We the Governed in the question that you leave, that you post up there, just because it's a lot easier for me to actually pick your question out when I see that. Sometimes there's a lot of commentary back and forth, which is great. We like the interaction, but when I'm trying to get to the questions, it's just a little bit easier if I can actually see them. So we're going to jump right into this. This is obviously going to be probably an interesting show, I hope, because there are a lot of people who are probably going to have a lot of questions about what's been going on in Olympia and all the various levels of drama, particularly after the 25-hour marathon session to get an income tax across the finish line and all the drama that Democrats put into that. And there's going to be a lot to talk about on that and other issues as well. Before I jump into that, I just want to have a real quick update. I know I've talked about doing this before when I'm on the show, and that is mainly a list of any places that I'm going to be speaking at just over the next few weeks, so that if you want to meet me in person, this just gives you an opportunity to do so, and it gives you a way to come out and chat with me in person. Love to do that. It's a lot. I kind of enjoy meeting people, and I like to meet people, particularly if you're watching the show, and get your feedback on what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, what you'd like to see different, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a couple of events that I'll be at, depending on where you are in Washington State. I might be able to see you there. On Wednesday, March 18th, and this is actually next week, so it'll be a week from tonight, I'm going to be basically emceeing a kickoff event for a candidate, Republican candidate running for the 30th Legislative District, Tiffany Bauer. She's in Federal Way, and that's going to be at the Billy McHale's restaurant in Federal Way. I believe that starts at 6 o'clock. I did not write that time down here, but I believe that starts at 6 o'clock. So if you're in Federal Way, and listen, I'm kind of going back to my old stomping ground. Some of you know I graduated from Thomas Jefferson High School. It was so long ago, and it's good to come back and be able to talk to people who are from that part of the state, and of course give you an opportunity to vote for somebody who's actually going to be sane compared to the Democrat that's currently holding that position right now. The next Saturday, which is a few days later, I will be out in Spokane at the Lincoln Day dinner there. I don't think I have a specific thing that I'm organized to do at that event unless they ask me to speak or help with their auction or something like that. But at this point, I'm really just planning to attend as an attendee there and really just kind of meet with some of my friends out there in Spokane. We've got some corruption investigations and some Doge Washington events to kind of organize out there. And I'm looking forward to meeting many of my friends out there in Spokane while I'm out there on the 21st. And additionally, the next Saturday, which is March 28th, my hometown crowd here in Thurston County, I will be the MC at their Lincoln Day dinner. Now, if you've seen the promotion image here, that is not a picture of me. I do not know where they got that AI-generated thing. The clothes seem to match what I usually wear, but I have no idea where they pulled that face from. So that's my secret disguise. I don't look anything like that, but I thought it was funny that they used some kind of AI-generated image there for me, especially since it's right in town, and I just did a speaking engagement in Thurston County, and I know they had access to some actual photos, so it is what it is. But I will be the MC at that event. That does start at 4:30, or come early at 4 o'clock if you're going to be getting a signed copy of one of Jason Rant's books. He's going to be he'll be the main speaker there, and I'm just the MC for that night. So it'll be fun to see all of you there in Thurston County, which is where I live now. That'll be at Hangar 51 at the Olympia Airport. If you don't know where that is, you can probably Google the Thurston County Republican Lincoln Day dinner as well. But that's what I'll be doing on that day. Then I have something on April 18th. Out in Idaho, just across the border from Spokane, where I'll be doing an all-day voter integrity event with Seth Keschel and I believe a number of other people as well. I didn't write down most of those details because that's over a month out. But I just wanted to give you a couple of ideas here on some places and events that I'll be at if you want to see me in person. And I always like to meet people out there in person. Also, if you do see me out in the wild, which is the term that was used recently when I ran into, I think it was Jay that came up to me in the Costco parking lot in Tumwater. I just want to thank you for coming up and saying hi. I always appreciate when people come up in person. Thanks for letting me borrow your cart. I absolutely had to get that battery changed on one of my cars, and it was much easier to carry that battery in with the cart. Thanks for letting me borrow it, and it just coincidentally turned out that he was a viewer of my channel, and so it's always fun to it's always fun to see people that are actually out there who actually watch my show, and they come up to me and I see them in person. So whether I run into you at AM PM or at Fred Meyer or Safeway or one of the various places that I have run into people just in the last few weeks who watch the show and I'm presuming follow the show on a regular basis, just appreciate when you come up and talk to me. So let's jump into some of the questions right now, and let's see if I can pop out this chat and get into them real quick. And again, as a quick reminder, as it says right up here, please use the @We the Govern so I can actually see that you have asked a question. Let's see. Now, somebody there did not proofread, so I don't know what that means, but that's okay. You can ask your questions. We don't judge, but I do have, it's much easier for me to interpret your questions if I can actually read them. So just a quick reminder on that. There's a question here. John Brown at T6U. Why are voters not voting on an income tax, especially since it targets a specific income level? Question mark. Well, the reason is because they don't want you to. The legislature doesn't want you to vote on this. And the one thing to remember, there had been a period of time, thanks to Tim Eyman, this was a good initiative, I believe, back in the day, that you had the ability to vote on taxes kind of after the fact as kind of the way for the public to respond and get back to you and say, hey, we didn't like this or we did like this. And most of the time, Washington voters vote against it. The Democrats and a couple of loser Republicans hated that, and they didn't like that as an option on the ballots because they didn't like the fact that the people were continually going back and saying that we don't like your stupid taxes. So, of course, they removed that. And notice how right after they removed that tax, that's when the Democrats jump in with, or I should say, with the ability to vote on these taxes. And remember, they didn't bind the legislature to the vote, but what they did do is it was like it was a way for the voters to say, listen, we don't like that tax or we don't like the tax. And most of the time, people did not like the tax. And so once that was removed as an option from the ballot, notice how the Democrats, and it is exclusively the Democrats now, with almost no exceptions, are pushing every single imaginary tax they can come up with, including the income tax, which is a longer story that we'll be talking about today. So you can vote on it if there's an initiative. You can't vote against it. You can't do a referendum on it because they put an emergency clause on the most recent income tax proposal. And that emergency clause effectively prohibits a referendum on that specific piece of legislation. It does not prevent you from putting together run an initiative to repeal that, that would essentially repeal that, change the law, and eliminate the income tax. But what's interesting to me about that is that the legislature, it was really led by Bob Ferguson when he was Attorney General, did push through a ballot distortion bill that allowed the AG to put its fingers on the scales and deceive the public with a weird, confusing little statement in there on the actual ballot itself, which is it's the only thing that does that. And when they have these little statements in there, this is their way. This is one of the ways that they were able to push back on some of the tax repeal of tax proposals on the vote yes, pay less effort by Let's Go Washington, led by Brian Haywood last year or a couple years ago now. And one of the reasons why some of those didn't pass is that they were so confusing. And obviously the $50 million ad campaign, or was it 60 million? I can't remember, that was spent by the unions because there's no grifter class greater than the unions in Washington state. public sector unions, and they created these distortion. Of course, they said each one of those taxes was desperately needed to fund children and lunches and all these good and important and incredible things. And of course, every single statement the AG put on was a complete and total lie, as we've seen now. The community, the CCA, the Climate Commitment Act, of course, just a complete. It's all about the fraud. That is all it funds essentially now. But anyway, so that got out there, and so what'll happen is they'll do the same thing with this proposed income tax thing. However, I will give a lot of credit to the Republicans, and they definitely deserve it. If you know a Republican legislator who was involved in this pushback in the 25-hour marathon session that they had in debating and proposing amendments to the income tax bill, they did a phenomenal job really putting the Democrats in an interesting corner where the Democrats helped define the deception that they've used from the beginning on this tax. And it's very helpful when they vote on the record to say that they're willing to drop. It's not going to be a millionaire's tax. It'll be a much lower level when they actually go to implement it someday. Maybe they'll start out with a millionaire's tax, supposedly, but then they'll drop it down to, $500,000 and then $200,000. And with inflation, they'll probably drop it down to $50,000. Anybody who makes anything basically has to pay an income tax at a stupid level that they propose there. That's classic Democrat style. And what they were able to do is really force a lot of these Democrats to go on the record with these amendments, and I thought they did a great job. 25 hours is a long time to do that. I believe that's one of the longest examples of this type of effort in the history of the state. I could be wrong. There might be some others. I have to look back and see what happened, but see what's happened in the past. But that was actually a really good effort on their part. But it was most significant forcing the Democrats to basically admit that every claim that they have related to this is a lie. It's not about the children. They didn't want to restrict it to just education. It's not about free lunches because they didn't want to restrict it to that. It's not about protecting your pension because they want to make your pension part of their income tax. It isn't about anything that they pretend or claim it is. I don't know that Bob Ferguson or any of the Democrats in Washington State have ever said anything honest about this tax proposal from the beginning, other than when they admitted that they owned the Supreme Court and they believe that the judges are so corrupt that without exception that they'll try to overturn one of the previous precedents and every other legal case that's ever looked at this issue and try to pretend like they found some way of threading the constitutional needle. Remember, these are the same justices that, unique in the world, have decided that capital gains is not income, and they've declared that. So knowing that the judges are that corrupt and that Bob Ferguson's going to appoint probably 3 of them this year out of the 9 because of retirements, willful and purposeful retirements right in the middle of their set in the time they should be in office, so that you can appoint them to function as incumbents during this type of a legal fight that would probably happen in the future. So anyway, that's where they're going, and that's what's going on, and it is a crazy issue that's being battled out here right now. Their next question, Sharon Milligan 7560. Thank you for using that way to govern. A little easier to find your question there. Millionaires are leaving. When will they come after us when there's no rich people left? Well, probably right away, actually. I mean, remember the income tax, even if I'm assuming Bob Ferguson will sign it, he needs the money for the fraud that he is desperately needing to fund. And remember, part of that are just basically grifting kickback schemes for Democrat insiders and the consultant class and all these other people that feed on the current political establishment that we have, the public sector unions, the grant grifting operations that are revolving around homeless industrial complex, and whatever other excuses that they can come up with. They got to find ways of funding illegals, non-U.S. citizens who are on the welfare programs in our state. They need to find ways of just kind of keeping that grift alive. And that's really what's happening with this right now. And so obviously wealthy people will leave the state, but it doesn't kick in for 2 years. They won't start looking at this until 2028, probably not implemented until 2029. That's kind of the basic time frame that it exists at right now. I actually think that that's purposely being done because Bob Ferguson doesn't want the true impact of the extraction, the cash extraction process to happen before the 2028 gubernatorial election. And so I really think that's why they're actually not going to be collecting this until 2029. So they're kicking it down the road to avoid it being an issue for the governor's race, in the sense that people will be practically experiencing this. Now, as you saw, Schultz, the head of Starbucks, who, by the way, is just a flaming leftist himself and helped elect all the idiots who voted in favor of this tax. Now suddenly he's leaving for Florida. This is typical. By the way, this is how states like Florida will be in trouble, because you're going to have crazy leftists like this, like Jeff Bezos, who also went to Florida, and others who conveniently will leave so they don't have to pay the taxes here. They'll go to a low tax state like Florida, and then they will help or try to get elected in Florida, the same type of people who they helped get elected and supported in Washington, to impose the same dumb policies there, because that is what Democrats do. They always try to raise taxes. They always make the city and your state less safe. They always find ways to blow government, which usually leads to the higher taxes. And so those guys are already leaving. Nick Hanauer, I'm sure, is right behind him. I know Nick Hanauer came out. Spokesperson for Nick Hanauer claimed that he wasn't leaving, but nobody really believes that. He's probably found a way to change his domicile as well, although he might be more concerned about the capital gains tax than anything else. And despite his secret meetings, they aren't that secret. People sent me photos of a meeting with Bob Ferguson at Starbucks up in Seattle. But whatever meetings he's having with the governor, trying to influence him, he's likely to be leaving. And who knows when Bill Gates and some of these other people will also head out the door. So, of course, the very people that funded the worst of the Democrat Party and the worst the Democrat Party has to offer, they're coming out and throwing this out there, and we'll see where it goes. Somebody had a question. This wasn't a question, but this is Amy Blessed Mayberry. Will you please put in a bill to ban abortion in Washington State? And that doesn't have a question on it, but I can't do that, but a legislature could. But I'm going to tell you that's just, it doesn't really change anything. That bill has been proposed many, 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 many times, endlessly in Washington. Going back about 50 years, it's been proposed almost every year that I'm aware of. It just never gets a hearing, never goes anywhere. If the Democrats are in charge, they absolutely will never let it go anywhere. So you can propose any bill you want in the legislature. It doesn't mean it gets a hearing or goes anywhere. Remember, we've had this conversation before about, for the 3,000 bills that get proposed, you're only going to look at a few hundred of them that get through the various stages of the process. And if they're a Republican proposal, which if you had a pro-life proposal, it would only be a Republican proposal at this point, it's just never going to get a hearing. It just doesn't go anywhere. So proposing it is not a super effective process at this point in time right now. Let's go. Somebody says, will income tax be challenged in the state Supreme Court or Federal District 9? It would be challenged in the state Supreme Court, not the federal court. That's the answer, short answer to that question. And the reason for that is it is an issue for Washington State. I don't think the feds specifically have jurisdiction over it. There's always like these scenarios where potentially when state Supreme Court justices are so corrupt and so problematic, right, that maybe something would happen and if the feds would step in that case. But my guess is that the Washington State Supreme Court won't be that openly corrupt, or at least in a way that would justify or trigger that kind of high threshold of federal intervention. I just wouldn't see that happening. This is a question from Garzilla. What could the president or the federal government do, if anything, to help the people of the state of Washington? Would they do anything? Well, sure. There's a whole bunch of things they can do, and several things are being done right now. Obviously, the best thing the federal government could do is cut off all federal funds coming to Washington and make it zero. And absolutely do that immediately as soon as possible. I would cut every single dollar coming from the federal government to Washington State. We have such egregiously corrupt entities here that I guess other than the dollars that you need to run very specific federal things, you got to keep JBLM running and, the military, and you're going to have to keep the federal parks running. But other than things the federal government exclusively has in its jurisdiction, I would remove all dollars and just stop sending them to Washington. Probably the DSHS and DCYF dollars are the most obvious. There's such thorough corruption inside the state agencies and total lack of oversight when it comes to fraud investigation that, there's no reason why other states should have their money stolen by the corruption in Washington state. Now, I believe, to be fair, that should also be done in Minnesota and New York and Massachusetts and Illinois, obviously, New Jersey. There's a lot of other states. We aren't the only ones. California, Oregon. The feds should absolutely cut all that money off, save the federal taxpayers those dollars, help pay down the deficit, just simply find ways to not send money to states like ours that have just demonstrated a complete egregious failure to actually manage the funds. So that would help. But the Democrats, of course, would scream bloody murder over that, and you'd see a much higher level of drama on their side. But what the heck, there's no difference at this point in time. And there's absolutely no reason to keep their dreams and schemes and corruption schemes alive. I mean, just cut it off. The other thing they can do is fix the voting rolls. The SAVE Act would help. It's not a complete panacea solution to all things, but fixing the voting roll drama. Washington State is one of the worst voting registration systems in America today, and one of the least transparent voting processes in America. And it really has to do with the fact that you have no chain of custody with the massive amount of bonus extra ballots that get distributed by the hundreds of thousands every single election cycle by especially places like King County, but even Pierce County. They send out 50,000 more ballots than they have voters. A lot of this is just each year. So a lot of this is just an example of corrupt, inept behaviors on their part. I do believe that when you look at the auditors, I think they're capable of counting the ballots that they get reasonably accurately. Now, it's not consistent every time, but they mostly can count them. The problem, as I've had to explain endlessly, and as we've seen in the video that I did about Snohomish County, the problem is the underlying lack of chain of custody and validation that you don't know who's voting. The fact that the Washington State Department of Transportation or Department of Licensing has registered non-U.S. citizens for decades in this state, and some of them vote, not all of them, but some of them clearly do vote. And on top of that, then, the inability to, the inactive, active voter list scam that's going on, so you can have ways of collecting lots of ballots or even printing them and sending them in and having them count as legitimate ballots, even if that original person no longer exists, they're dead, or they haven't been in the state for decades. And there's some serious problems with this. Many of these issues have been exposed. Usually what you get is total denial. The Seattle Times is not honest. Nobody who works there is. They're absolutely unwilling to ever report on anything that's wrong in the election process. Not at all. Not a single person there is remotely honest to this. And if they accidentally were and they committed an act of journalism, they'd be fired and gone and probably sued. So this is the clear and obvious challenge you have. And the same thing goes with King 5 and these other places. They're not going to report the truth. Which goes back to something else that did actually happen recently, which is speaking of the problems with the Supreme Court. This isn't a state issue, it's a federal issue in this case. But obviously the Democrats are basically sending the message that they believe they should be able to exclude any kind of media that comes to Olympia and wants to report on what's going on, and they don't agree with them, that they want to exclude them. And so what that sort of tells me is that if Republicans take over Washington State, then it'd be perfectly appropriate for them to cut off King 5 and Spokesman Review and the Seattle Times and whatever other pretend outlets that exist exclusively just to report what the government tells them to report. And so that makes them basically Democrat Party extensions of the Democrat Party propaganda machine there. And so I guess what they're trying to say is that it'd be perfectly appropriate then for, if Republicans come in and take over, that they can just come in and exclude those people forever from Olympia. I don't believe that that's a good idea or that it's right, but that's what that's what they're saying with this recent decision that you had a federal court judge on. Now, obviously, if you're following that a little bit close, and this is about Brandy Cruz and Jonathan Cho and Ari Hoffman being denied access. or a press pass by these insiders. I mean, it's ridiculous. This hasn't happened in the past in Washington State. You remember these guys used to pretend, these Democrats used to pretend that they wanted more journalists in Olympia. But now the truth is they just want journalists that are actually propaganda arms of their party. They don't want people actually reporting anything that's different than whatever agenda they kick out from their PIOs and on their staff. Let's go back. So those are two things that voter rolls and taking away the money from Washington, they should do that. Jason Fisher, 1530. Question, what's the end game for the situation in Iran? Did Trump lose control? How much longer will this go on? I am worried if this continues. Republican Party finished for generations. Okay. A federal issue, really an international issue, but let's talk about the bombs in Iran. And sometimes I've talked on these issues, not too much on the show because usually I end up talking about Washington state issues, but let's get into foreign policy and talk about it a little bit here. I've always despised the concept of forever wars and nation rebuilding. I think it's a terrible idea. The reason why America sort of got involved in this in more recent times is, I think, the historical examples that generally kind of worked, which is when we occupied Germany and Japan in particular, and actually did help them with nation rebuilding, and to a lesser extent, the Philippines and South Korea, for example. Different situations and different issues there. But and we had a lot of success. Listen, Japan's one of the closest allies that America has today on the foreign policy front. Germany may have drifted a little ways away from that, but instead of having another war in Europe, we at least had a country that was a nominal ally. And I say this as somebody who's traveled a bit in Germany, and I actually have family members that are over there. My son is over there right now on an exchange program. And so and we've hosted exchange students. Both my dad did and our family has as well from Germany. I feel like we have a lot of close ties. We've hosted exchange students from other countries too. But the reality is, if you travel around, you know that Germany was destroyed at the end of World War II, and America did come in and provide a lot of financing and support for rebuilding that country. Now, people have talked about this many times, the difference between that and trying to do the same thing in Iraq or Iran or Iraq or Afghanistan or Libya, is that those countries don't have any history of any kind with modern representative government. They don't have they don't have much in the way of institutions that could be picked up on and continued. There's all kinds of other problems you're going to have. You can't force people to decide to have representative government. There's no way you're going to ever do that. And it's kind of like looking at the modern colleges that we have in America today, where they try to force people to believe they're DEI garbage or whatever other social programming operations they have. You can convince some people, but you're not going to convince everybody. And as much as they try, and as much as they try to convince boys that they're actually girls or girls are actually boys, it's not going to work for everybody. It's not going to work when you try to do that in another country. And nation building is a disastrous approach, I think, and why you'd involve the military in that at the end of the day is terrible. So getting out of that kind of business is important. I don't see that happening in Iran. I do see that whenever they decide that they're finally done with the bombing campaign there, and the complicating part of that is, are they going to actually go in and try to get the uranium that's floating around in that country, or that would be a boots-on-the-ground operation probably if they actually were going to do that, but they could probably do that in a more clandestine sort of way where they're not necessarily risking a lot of American soldiers out there. At this point in time, the Americans have gotten off quite lightly. We've gotten off very lightly in this campaign against Iran. And, but obviously if it does drag on too long, I tend to agree with what you say there, that the Republicans would probably end up being punished for it. If it doesn't drag on that long, obviously it's longer than going into Venezuela and doing something, but if it doesn't drag on that long and it ends in another month, I would say, at least another month, and oil is still flowing somehow, so you have the cost of fuel not directly impacted by this. I actually don't think you're going to see that kind of political blowback from a foreign policy standpoint on domestic elections. But it is, it's a big deal. I mean, and Iran's a big country. There's no way that, regardless of how capable the American military is, if you look at how mountainous and large Iran is and how big, it's a huge population. There's 90 million people there. Sure, you'd have a ton of allies probably, but why would you ever begin to occupy that country, I think you do degrade the ability of Iran, who's caused a lot of problems over in recent times. I remember as a kid, 9 years old or so, watching there was a lot of graffiti if you lived in Washington State at the time, and I remember some graffiti on rocks. I used to drive by. It just struck me as a kid, mainly because it used the F word and it said Iran on it, really big words, and I didn't understand what was going on. I remember asking one of my parents at the time, and so they kind of explained, why that was written on the rock, and that's why I realized that the hostages in Iran, and I couldn't understand why we were letting them take our American citizens and turn them into hostages there, for example. So this has been going on a long time. Inevitably, Obama sent the Iranians, pallet loads of cash, and Trump's going to send them bombs. And which one works best, I guess we'll have to see. But I certainly don't have any I don't believe we should be occupying the country or putting boots on the ground there to any significant degree. And I don't think it should be a forever war. But I don't feel bad at all about destroying their Navy and their Air Force and their ability to make nuclear bombs or launch missiles or develop drones or whatever. None of that stuff. The more that gets destroyed, the better, in my opinion. And listen, I'm saying that as somebody who actually has a couple kids in the military. So this isn't me saying it like some kind of person that has no stake in the game. And, it's one of those issues. The only thing I am kind of concerned about is that there is inevitably sleeper cells of some kind or sympathetic folk to the Iranian regime that are likely to try to do bad things here. I'm a little surprised they haven't hit us harder yet. I don't have a high degree of confidence in the ability of the law enforcement in America to stop those things, partially because I think it's very hard and partially because I don't think that they're as capable as is portrayed sometimes in the media, but we'll have to see. So a lot's going on there right now. Let's see. Somebody down here ban income taxes. Yeah, that's a little late. Income taxes were banned. But in a couple years, if the Democrats have their way, they're going to definitely get it here if they can. Can we have, this is a question from Let the Galaxy Burn 944. That says something if that's your name, if that on your thing, but it says, can we have another initiative to try to remove the carbon tax? The answer is yes, you could. The question is, if they run it, can they overcome the half a $50 million or $100 million campaign to save it? Because remember, there's some serious grifters here that need to steal your money, and this is the only way they can do it. And the easiest way for them to hide it is through the slush funds that the CCA creates. And so they're going to spend a heck of a lot of money to keep the gravy train going right now, if they can. So the way, as I described earlier, the way these impact statements are made on the ballot itself are so deceptive and dishonest, and people just don't know. To bypass that and get to why they should repeal it is very difficult. So we'll see what happens. But let's see. Spinner not winner at We the Government. If this should turn, sorry, for some reason, oh, by the way, you misspelled it. That's why it didn't light up there. If this should turn out to be a tipping point and we got some of these clowns out of office, could this be repealed by future lawmakers? And the answer to that is yes. Any law passed by legislators can be repealed by legislators. Although, remember, it doesn't mean that you would have enough votes to overturn a governor's veto. But if you had a Republican governor as well, that would be very easy to get rid of it. Even though the damage to the economy is done. I don't know that the damage is done yet, but it's going to be done shortly. In some ways, I kind of feel like this desperate push on this issue, which every Democrat voting for this has been dreaming of this opportunity for an additional slush fund for a long time. And so, and again, it's all about the corruption and keeping the gravy train going. When you have a bloated, out-of-control government where nobody is ever held accountable, no matter how much fraud is committed, no matter how much they steal, no matter how they waste it, no matter how incompetent and clownish they really are, then what happens is when when you have that kind of government, all they really care about is getting more money. But some level of desperation is involved in what's going on here. There seems to be, listen, you got a lot of really stupid people in government. That's absolutely true. You have people there's a lot of legislators you saw getting up and giving speeches that I don't think they really know what they're doing or have any clue. They're just doing whatever they're told to do. But there are some that not many, but there are a few on the Democrat side that are at least tied in enough to have some sense of consequences. They are aware of something. They're aware that perhaps there's going to be a lot more bad stories or news coming out about them, and they want to get ahead of this with more cash. They're hoping to feather their nests a little bit easier for when they have to bail out. Or they see a much more catastrophic collapse in tax revenue coming up than is commonly forecast by most of the political insiders right now. But either way, they're aware of something, and that's one of the reasons why they're pushing on this. So with such level of just absolute mouth foaming, sort of rabid focus, especially during a short session the way that they have. So we'll have to see, but there's a fairly significant drama coming. There will be backlashes. This is particularly true if the SAVE Act passes or something equivalent like that impacts Washington State on the voting side of things. Let's see. Let the galaxy burn 944. Does Washington State not have a filibuster anymore to prevent stuff like this from happening? We don't have a filibuster. That does not exist in the same way that you think of it from a federal standpoint. And remember, the filibuster is not something that's built into the Constitution even at the federal level. So if you actually look at the Constitution, at the federal Constitution, which nobody probably does, but let's pretend you do, and you look at it and you look through the history of the Founding Fathers, the filibuster did not exist back then. However, there was the idea that you could give comment, and as long as you were physically giving comment, you could prevent and delay final decision on the vote. So there was a long history in America up until, I believe it was the late 70s, where in order to do a filibuster, you had to be speaking. You had to be out there. And it was a way that the minority would use to put more pressure or leverage or exposure on a given piece of legislation that they didn't like. But it used to be something that you actually had to speak. You actually had to have a real filibuster. Sometime, I think it's the 70s, they changed things in Washington, D.C. and said, well, if you have less than 60 people, if you don't have 60 people to overrule a filibuster, which is what you need in order to get the voting or to overcome somebody from getting up there and speaking the whole time, then if you don't have 60 people, then the bill can just be held up by a filibuster that's not a real filibuster. It's just a on paper filibuster. That's just a theory that you could actually go out there and speak, but they aren't speaking. And I actually think we have to get back to a real filibuster. I wouldn't repeal the filibuster. I'd just make it a real speaking filibuster. So let's get to Washington State then. Because they do this at the federal level as a historic way of operating by the rules that they have in the federal government, the federal legislature, especially the Senate side, that's really where you see it. But since they have that rule there, people oftentimes presume that rule exists at the state level, and it doesn't. At our state level, we do not have a filibuster option. We do have the ability of the minority or other people to put in amendments, which is what the Republicans did, and to have some level of comment on the bill. And that's what you saw with the 25-hour recent marathon session in the legislature, where the Republicans were putting out a lot of really good, insightful, on-the-record amendments to that bill. The importance of those amendments are their documented records of what those Democrats actually think on specific issues. Like, do you really want this money? You pretend this money is going to go to the children, but then if we make it so that's the only place it can go, will that be the way it works? And they said no, because they don't care about it. It's total lie. Not a single Democrat who says this is going to children actually believes it. None of them do, and that was evident in that vote, for example. They don't believe it's going to go to children. They don't want it to go to children. That's just a story they tell for really just like the Seattle Times, like the fake news that absolutely will never report the truth. The Seattle Times is going to report whatever they're told to report by the government and the public information officers who work there. And essentially, the Seattle Times functions like an extension of the public information officers in state government today. And this is particularly true with the grant money that's come out of the states now, because the state to only certain media operations like the Seattle Times. So they're essentially a subsidized, government-subsidized media operation now. And so, of course, they're never going to report the truth. They didn't report it before. They're sure as heck not going to report it now. So they just want to give the stories. The Seattle Times can just parrot whatever the talking points are and then forget about it 4 or 5 years from now when most of that money gets squandered and wasted on whatever ego project comes out of Olympia. And that's kind of really what we're looking at this. But this, in some ways, that I think there's a lot of situations here where if you do have a steep economic decline that occurs, it does create a political tipping point for the party in power. And listen, Democrats have a strong history in America of creating political environments that people want to flee. They've done this actually everywhere that they get significant control. It doesn't matter if it's New York City or Detroit or Illinois or California. They can take paradise and absolutely turn it into a disaster zone if you let them have that kind of power. And Washington State has made the mistake of giving the Democrats enough power to demonstrate that they can harm us and do their best to destroy the community and state that we have if they have enough power. And they will do it, and they can't help themselves. They're just addicted to it. So they'll do it every single time. I have no examples of them not doing this. Every single time they feel like they can get away with it, they always ruin the environment they live in. What's always funny to me, of course, and it's funny in a sad way, is that many of the big, deep pocket people who, whether you call them Learjet liberals or whatever it is, whether it's the Costco guy or Bill Gates or Nick Hanauer or Howard Schultz or any of these people, they fund the Democrats. And the Democrats create an environment they don't want to live in anymore. They can't afford to live in, or it's not wise to live in anymore if you have that kind of income. And so they leave, as they're all leaving right now. And then, of course, we're stuck having to clean up the mess that they funded and left behind. And that's the kind of inevitable, drama that you see right now. You don't see people fleeing Republican areas. You just don't. And this is the danger that you're going to face and they're already seeing this now in states that are conservative, that are getting flooded with a bunch of escaping liberals or leftists from states like California, Washington, Illinois, and other places. They come into your state, and then they're just going to start voting, or at least putting people in that share the same bad, dumb ideas that the place you just left did. And so the Republicans in those states are completely unprepared, which is why if you lose in Washington or these other states too long, the red states won't protect you because they won't be red very much longer. That is a challenge. That is a problem. And it's one thing that we should just be aware of. Let me make sure. Let's see. I'm trying to get to the questions here. Let's see. So no filibuster. Sorry, I think that's the last one I answered. Somebody here at Asnurik. I will never pay a 9.9% state income tax. If this goes through, I'll leave before it takes into effect. Take my tech talents to Nashville. I am visiting this summer. Yeah, I'm sure you're not alone. I mean, many people, especially if they think they're going to be at the income level that could be affected by it, maybe not day one, but within a few years, most people who came to Washington State, at least it was an attractive element as to being here. They didn't want to pay an extra 10% for nothing, for garbage, for total corruption in government. That's all you're getting for this. You're getting a terrible education system that's only going to get worse the longer the Democrats stay in charge of it. You are not going to get your money. There's nothing good that you're going to get out of it. Maybe more homeless camps, less public safety. That's the kind of thing the Democrats like. But so you probably won't be alone. Chris Fry, 555. But I'm going to tell you, wherever you went, Washington is one of 7 states left in America that didn't have an income tax. Idaho has an income tax. Many of these other states have income taxes. So don't be under any illusions to think you're going to avoid the income tax by moving to most of these Republican states. Most of them have income taxes. Not all of them. Florida does not have it. But some of those other states will get pressure. I mean, it's a wise thing to not have an income tax. The best thing a state can do is start repealing taxes if it wants to attract people who are going to be productive. Let's see. Chris Fry, 555. Will the political winds ever shift back? Is there just too much of a stigma voting for a Republican in the metropolitan areas? Actually, the Republican winds always switch back. The question is just when. So anybody that ever thinks that for some reason you're in a forever zone where whatever happens, it's always going to stay the same. There's a theory in economics, and it's like momentum. I'm not using the right term now, but it's a theory that people have. It's a fallacy that people will develop where they think, okay, we got momentum, and therefore things will always continue on the same track. And it is a common human nature kind of thing where people will say, I just don't think that we're going to change, and so therefore, and bad things have happened for a couple years in a row, so I'm just assuming that bad things will happen forever, and so that's the mentality that they face. It's the same reason that, and you can do this on the other side too. You can say we've had a wonderful, healthy society for so long that it's going to stay this way no matter what happens, right? We're always going to have a power grid no matter what happens. Our dollar is always going to be worth something no matter what happens. So there's a tendency for people, gosh, I'm not getting the right term here, but there is a tendency for people to think that because this is the way things have gone, I'm going to presume that's the way things are going to go in the future. And that's not going to be the case. So that can be good and bad. And, so we will see what it takes to change Washington state. And I'm going to be involved in it because I can tell you if Washington continues down this path, Idaho, Wyoming, Nebraska, North and South Dakota, when all these other states, Utah, none of them are going to last very long because I don't see strength in those Republican teams that exist in those states at all. You may think that they're going to be conservative, but you're going to find out that because of weak political leadership in those states, look at Utah recently, just had this thing where they refused to deal with illegal immigration there. The Republicans, same with the Idaho, same kind of problem. It's stunning to those of us who are actually fighting in a state like this, like Washington, and we're aware of why these policies are terrible, to see states that are safely Republican, so I'll put this air quote, safely Republican, that don't go down the road and actually implement Republican policies, get rid of some of their stupid taxes that they do have, implement better and more effective freedom-oriented policies. Florida is the one exception to this in some ways, and it's only because they were a purple state that could go either way for so long that they really do seem to have moved in a much better direction public policy-wise, and I think they're going to continue in that direction. But other states like Texas they're in a big fight over this right now. So just because the party label is attached to them doesn't mean that they share the same belief system. And that's what we're finding in these Republican states. Listen, I was just in Bozeman 2 days ago, and I'm going to tell you that they are importing just as many drug addicts and homeless people as Seattle. Smaller number, but proportionate to their population. Why? Because they had grant grifters, probably from Washington, that moved out there and, of course, convinced the complete clowns in that city council to implement policies that basically opened the door to the homeless industrial complex, just like we did in Olympia, Bellingham, and Seattle, and Vancouver years ago, and Spokane now. So I think that's just something to be aware of. But the winds always do change. And somebody said, Will W7WRP, they want Brian Haywood to leave. Yes, they do. They have the Democrats. There's nobody in the state of Washington, no one, probably nobody in 20, 30 years that the Democrats hate more than Brian Haywood. He is the greatest threat to the Democrat Party, and they know it, and that's why they don't like him. So probably seeing if they can drive him out of the state's one of their objectives. Let's see. Richard Oliver F4S. Was this income tax bill written in such a way has to pass by the Constitution so they can't avoid it passing the Supreme Court muster? Well, okay, so here's the Democrats' argument on how they've justified the income tax and that they just passed. And their argument is that it's an income tax on everyone except for everybody gets $1 million deductible. That's basically prevents you from paying any income tax in the first $1 million. Everybody knows that's going to change. It might even change before it gets implemented the first time. They may drop it down to $500,000. I know there was an amendment that said that it couldn't go below $100,000, and they didn't. The Democrats vote against that. So they essentially want it. And so here's the other thing: when you look back on the constitutional decisions the Supreme Court had back in 1932, I believe, on the income tax, they ruled that it was illegal in Washington because there had to be uniform taxation, had to apply to everybody. What the Democrats are trying to do to get around that is they're saying that, well, it does apply to everybody except for the first $1 million on anybody, no matter who it is, that they earn. And that's their way of trying to get around that this unequal treatment under the law, essentially, is what it is. Now, listen, our founding fathers were very aware of scams and schemes like this in the taxing world in our state. I mean, if you actually look at our state constitution to read it, which probably means you never went to public school and certainly didn't go to Evergreen State College, but if you actually read it, it's pretty good. The Washington State Constitution is actually a really good document, well written, much more focused on protecting individual liberties and Second Amendment rights and free speech. I mean, a lot of things are actually really well done in the state Constitution. The challenge comes: what happens when you have judges that are so completely comprehensively corrupt, admittedly corrupt at this point in time, owned entirely by the governor, the way they've been appointed and the way that they have made it really difficult to run against them. When that happens, then now you have this, it's kind of this weird way of getting around constitutional protections. This is a concern. It should be a concern. And it's the same concern that we share at the federal level, where if you can get enough bad Supreme Court justices at the federal level there, you can start coming up with bizarre decisions. Look at some of these leftist judges at the federal Supreme Court level who come up with, they can't identify what a woman is. They can't do, English is just nothing to them. It is purely about political decision-making. When you have that, then the judiciary is out of control, right? And then your Constitution has a lot less protection than it would otherwise have. And it's one of the reasons why we do have to pay attention to the judicial elections. Let's see. Can this okay, here's the next question. Jason Fisher, 1530. Can this millionaire tax be challenged by court and initiative? And the answer to both is yes. There are problems with both of those challenging. It can't be challenged by referendum, which would be another way to throw it out, is run a referendum and you could repeal the law. However, you could run an initiative that essentially ends it. You could have a court case that essentially ends it. But that assumes on the court side that you would get a fair hearing. And right now, it's been admitted openly and widely by a lot of the Democrats that they've openly discussed this illegally, and it's not legal. But and when push comes to shove, they'll deny it. But they've admitted it many times in private settings to other people, and implied it many, many times that they've already got this. The Supreme Court, Washington State Supreme Court judges are already in the bag on this one. So you can run a really good case against it. But we saw this with the legal challenge to the capital gains tax, same thing. And that was some evidence. I realize there's people out there who who want to not believe that our judges are comprehensively corrupt. There is no exception to this right now in the Supreme Court. Our judges are comprehensively corrupt. They're dishonest. They're political creatures. They absolutely will not do anything that's going to hurt the Democrat Party if it's pushed against, if it's solid enough and it's important enough. And this one, the grifting operations here are endless. So of course they're going to do what they have to make it work. Let's see. Here's a question here from Terry Kranjevich or something like Kranjevich. Sorry, I have to go up here again. What percentage, by the way, for some reason you misspelled that, we the government. That's why it didn't pop up. What percentage of the Washington state budget is in fraud? Well, that's a good question. My guess is, and this is where definitions of fraud really, at what point is it fraud, incompetence, stupidity, and waste, right? And these lines are a little blurry sometimes. If you lump those together and say fraud, incompetence, and waste are all kind of in the same category, your dollars are being wasted, my guess is that you could probably cut Washington State's budget by 50% and most people wouldn't notice. Now, that doesn't mean it's all fraud. A sizable percentage of it is, but it means that 50% of the money is probably wasted in some significant way. Now, you might have to change some policies and legal changes to make that possible, but you could cut the budget of Washington State by half, and you would still have a good state, in fact, way better than it is now, operating much more efficiently. Are we up to a third of our dollars being stolen or wasted through fraud? Maybe. It kind of depends on how you look at these federal programs. I did a little short video that launched a few days ago. By the way, I launched a couple of shorts because I was traveling around visiting some kids at the Air Force Academy and in college, and I was taking my dad with me and touring, and I wanted him to see the kids in the college setting. And so because of that, I didn't have the ability to finish some of the videos that I was hoping to do. So I had a few shorts, and I just put those out there. I hope that didn't throw too many of you off. But there was a short that I put up talking about the different types of fraud in government. Programmatic fraud, which is what I was describing there, is mostly federal programs that are administered by the state, but most of the dollars come in as federal dollars. Not 100% of it, but most of them do. That type of fraud, when you lump that in, right, the percentage of fraud is much, much higher because those are huge dollar volumes. So when we're talking about like Apple Health or food stamps, essentially the food stamp program, which is any of these programs administer Medicaid as well, not so much Medicare, but Medicaid in particular, SBA loans, so small business associated loans, a lot of this stuff, that type of fraud, that starts to make it much, much bigger. And if you consider that part of the state budget, or essentially the way that money comes in and gets squandered, even though it's money that goes to the feds and then kind of comes back to the state, you're probably looking at about a third. The federal government already admits that 10% of the money is stolen that you give to the federal government. I think that report came out about last year, but that number's been about the same for the last 2 decades. So roughly 10% of your money for sure is stolen. That's the beginning level of fraud analysis. It's much higher than that now. COVID really changed the game on this, where fraud just became a way of life for a lot of people, even more than it had been before. And so this widespread fraud that also involves like organized crime sometimes, and the Somali fraud operations and some of these other things are just so huge and so significant that I don't think people quite realize the scope and expanse. And listen, there's so much money there that the only question you have to ask yourself is, why would organized crime even bother with the private sector anymore when the federal government's the place to go? Lucrative. You got a whole political party that'll defend no matter how bad you are, no matter how much money you steal, no matter how blatant and obvious it is. You got one whole political party in this country that absolutely will protect you at all costs, so you can steal to your heart's content. And unlike organized crime, like the mob or somebody out there, that you don't have to really worry about law enforcement so much, because one side, the Democrats in Washington, in our state and elsewhere in the country, will do anything and everything they can to block any kind of investigation and effort to hold you accountable for the money you've stolen. And the reason for this is philosophical, mostly because the Democrat Party and big government in general, the leftists in particular over there, we used to have Democrats that didn't think this way, but I don't think we do anymore at any position of power in Washington state now. But the Democrats basically believe government's the answer and solution to everything. And so anytime you critique or criticize the government, then to them that's questioning the basis of their religion and belief system, where they say, hey, you are challenging even, so we want to pretend like there's nothing wrong in government. Public schools are awesome. They're just amazing, according to Democrats. No matter how bad the test scores get, no matter how abysmal every aspect of that system's become and how much worse it's getting, the Democrats believe any critique of that is a challenge to their political power, even by questioning it. So you're not even allowed to question it. Just like you can't question elections. You can't question their attempt to defund the police. You can't question their abuse of the tax system. You can't question the insider self-dealing through the homeless industrial complex. That's all done. This is purposeful, because to challenge that is to challenge the religion. And so the religion of the left believing government's the solution to all things. And so this is why it becomes so irrational to people who maybe you weren't paying attention to politics before, and you suddenly discover that your apathy and ignorance about what's going on in the political process won't protect you, because you may not be interested in politics, but the politicians, especially the Democrats, they're interested in you. And there's no scenario where they'll ever let you live your life or be left alone. So, and that's true if you live in Idaho or Wyoming or Florida or Texas. They're coming for you regardless of where you live. You can be delusional and think moving there is going to save you. It will be cheaper potentially for a little while, but they aren't going to save you. And in fact, I would say that they crash much, much harder as the left rolls out their efforts. So that's why defeating it here is important. I think they're having some setbacks, and that's why you see them being particularly rapacious in our state. But that's the way it goes. Let's see. Jay Watkin, 1776. I'm assuming you meant, do you have any information on the sheriff situation, speaking of voting? Yeah, they passed the terrible bill that would allow the Democrats to remove sheriffs they don't like. Now, it's a little more complicated than that. I'm simplifying it, but they did pass that. I don't know. I mean, we'll see what the governor signs. This one's had some blowback in some strange places, so we'll see what happens. But so far, it has passed. Chris Fry 555. Do you think to stop the transgender things in prisons, what do you think about the chances of a detransitioner inmate suing under an Eighth Amendment violation? I don't know. I mean, good question. I don't think that's going to be probably the motivating factor that determines whether some of the squandering of public resources, tax dollars, in all these different conversion therapy stuff that they're doing in prisons is going to be the approach. There are a lot of lawsuits now coming out on the federal level, obviously, since some of them have proceeded, that are definitely going to be hitting schools and medical institutions and a lot of places like that. The prison system, I don't know. We'll have to see. Let's see. Jim Hibbs, 28 or 2372. Hey, Glenn, I'm 78 and I saw some conservatives representing me in Congress. Very courageous statements. If you mean Congress in D.C., that's good. If you meant, I haven't noticed that lately, but if you meant conservative representatives in Washington State, yeah, there were some really, really good ones. I'm telling you, there's some great video from TVW of some great and impassioned speeches by the Republicans, some really sharp ones that were pushing back on some issues and did a really good job. And they deserve a lot of credit and a lot of recognition for what they were doing. I think that was very important. Cage TZ5UW. Question: what do you believe has led to the lack of conservative local media, except for AM radio, in the state and county as a whole? Well, this is a good question. I think there is an upsurge, obviously, in conservative media, but they're not going to go out and imitate a failing business model, which is newspapers, right, or traditional TV. They're not going to go out probably and just imitate that exactly. Conservative media is going to start in social or on the website, kind of non-traditional podcasts like Randy Cruz or Jonathan Cho or Ari Hoffman. He's coming out of AM radio. Jason Rantz coming out of AM radio. Websites like mine or others that do start up. The Watchdog, right? The Concerned Citizens Cowlitz County Watchdog. Places like that. This homegrown sort of media that's going to rebel against the corporate lefty sort of talking points that the traditional media has left as they collapse themselves due to the fact that they've decided to cut off 60-70% of the state's population and ignore them and report. They're so obviously spokespeople for the government now. Nobody believes that media, you're going to get anything out of the truth out of these guys. But to get going is expensive. To get going is challenging. But it's the greatest threat that the left probably faces is this upsurge in independent, non-traditional media that's coming out there and speaking truth to power and questioning authority, neither of which is allowed in a socialist sort of world. And the Democrats are essentially implementing a lot of socialist policies. And so that's why they like censorship. That's why they want to prevent conservative media from having access to the Capitol and to the state legislature if they can. That's why they're going to continually restrict non-traditional media access, because they can't control what they say or manipulate what they say. The Seattle Times is just a puppet for the government. King 5 News is just a puppet for the government, right? Spokesman Review, any of these newspapers, they're just essentially Tri-City Herald, right? Mostly just puppets. So they know this, and that's why they don't want the non-traditional media. But I do think it's inevitable. I think that it's actually going to surge much greater, especially over the next few years, than anybody's ever imagined right now. And so that's going to be pretty significant. Let's see. I'm going to keep going down. Jason Fisher, 1530, question. Forgot to say, hey, Glenn, hope you are well. Will Trump's plan to take over Strait of Hormuz work? I don't think that he's planning to take it over. The question is, can you prevent or convince the Iranians that sinking oil ships is not their best plan? Listen, you got to imagine if you were on the inside of the Iranian government right now and you hate America and you've been preaching hate America forever and hate Israel, whatever, but you hate you hate America, right? We're the big Satan, and they've been saying that since I was a little kid. And they've been trying to indoctrinate their population, which I don't think the whole population buys into this. A lot of them don't like what's going on there. But nevertheless, the people in power certainly support that idea. They, at this point in time, losing as much of their leadership as they have and a huge portion of their military, they probably did not expect Trump to get this serious about it. They're going to do anything that they think they can get away with. And so in order to prevent them from stopping oil flowing through Hormuz, which, by the way, most of that doesn't come to America anyway. It goes to other countries. But because oil's a commodity around the world and an important one, America's producing more energy than we need right now. We are a net exporter of energy in a lot of ways. But that net export world market that exists out there is affected when supply is substantially constrained from one of the major places out there. Could Venezuela replace a lot of the Middle East oil? Sure they could, but not tomorrow. It would take a long time. Same with some of these other places where they're expanding energy development. But it's a worldwide market. And so when you restrict it in a certain specific area that may be more specifically impacting India or China, or Europe from there, but it's still going to be an impact to the market because those buyers that can't get that oil will ultimately shift and try to purchase that fuel, maybe natural gas as well, from other sources like America, like Venezuela or other countries. And so that's going to distort the market and ultimately is what jacks up the price. I'm being very simplistic about it. It's a little more complicated than that. So when you say Trump taking over the strait there, we being America, would have to have a fairly unusual posture and structure there to be able to efficiently and effectively defend and protect all the oil tankers that would want to come through there. And remember, the other side only has to take out one or two to convince people that it's not a good plan. So we'll have to see, but it's it's a major foreign policy issue, and we are living in interesting times when it comes to that. Let's see. Here's from Pam S5S2X. Have you heard much about the Department of License data breach cover-up? How concerned should we be? Yes, I have. And essentially what it is not so much about being concerned right this minute. The question is what's been stolen or taken over in the past. The Department of Licensing was clearly aware during this entire time. And by the way, Bob Ferguson and Nick Brown includes them. They were personally and specifically aware of this data breach. What it sounds like is that the Department of Licensing just refused to correct it and fix it and close the door for a long time. I don't know if it's a full decade, maybe it's 6 years, like I think the complaint says. It could be 8 years. It's been a long time. And from what it appears, they were notified, they were aware of it, they just didn't care. They didn't want to fix it, and they refused to fix it. And Bob Ferguson knew about this personally. There is no way he didn't know about this. He's aware of it. Now, he's obviously pathological, and he'll lie about anything he possibly can, but he knew about it, and he's personally liable, I believe, in his effort to conceal and pretend like this isn't happening. And how that blows back into Nick Brown, he'll be aware of it as well in his former capacity, both as the DOJ attorney out of Seattle, but also before that in the Inslee administration. He would have been aware of this as well, but Bob Ferguson very specifically was aware of it. And so what it looks like to me is they're going to try to ignore this and hope it goes away. I don't think it will. This is going to expose a lot. Based on what I read in the complaint and some other information out there, it looks like organized crime efforts were able to come in and just steal people's identity directly through that, and the Department of Licensing tried to cover up and pretend like it wasn't happening, all at the same time where they were openly allowing it to happen and refusing to fix the problem. Now, the problem appears to be fixed right around the time Trump came into office, not because Trump did anything on it, but because he must have scared somebody in the Inslee administration and or the Ferguson administration, and so some reason they decided to finally close that door, even though they could have done it any time the previous 6 years. So I think we're just barely beginning to scratch the surface of what this issue is and where it goes. Next question, Agarzilla. Is there anything you don't hate about the Democratic Party? Anything that Olympia has passed that you like? Well, this cycle, I'm not sure if they've had any bills that have passed that are good. I'm gonna wait until I see what Ferguson signs. I don't care that they've decided to make Evergreen State, Washington State, officially our motto being the Evergreen State. So I guess that's okay, Bill. That they were able to find a cactus down in Southwest Washington and declare that a state cactus. That's another bill that I don't mind. But other than that, no. Now, getting back to the first part of the question, is there anything about the Democrat Party that I don't hate? Yeah, I don't hate a lot of the regular people that are involved in it. I work with them sometimes. Although it's becoming rarer and rarer to find anybody who affiliates with the Democrat Party in any official capacity, right? There's people out there who I've been voting Democrat because I've always voted Democrat. But and some of those people you can still reach. A lot of those people are the people who do make those changes and they decide to vote Republican. It's probably not because they necessarily fall in love with the Republican Party. It's mostly because the Democrats have just gotten so crazy. The whole walkaway movement and all this stuff, when you run into people who've gone through this, it's like losing your religion, and you've made the shift over and you decide you're going to vote Republican or at least conservative, or you're not going to vote mindlessly with Democrats. I totally understand people like that. And again, I work with a lot of people who have gone through that transition. And it is a transition, and a pretty significant one for many of them. And so I don't hate those people. I love these people. They're good folk. They were just in a bad group. It's like somebody coming out of a cult. And you can I think it's always a mistake to judge people in a harsh way who, probably didn't know that much about what was going on, and they were already going down that path. I got family members that are Democrats, and I love them. They're good folk, but their politics are terrible. And many of them are just unaware of what the Democrat Party actually stands for now. The more you know about the Democrat Party, the more you're not going to like them. For common sense people, if you're corrupt, if you've bought into kind of this leftist socialist religion, then you're going to like them, because that's the only vehicle to support corruption and socialism you're going to find. I do not think overall as a whole that that's the winning fight down the road. I mean, if even Argentina decided to reject it, and these other countries that have been rejecting socialism once again, if they're willing to do that, I suspect that America, even in places like Seattle, are going to have to start thinking twice about where they're going. So anyway, okay, there's a question here. Sharon Milligan, 7560. The three didn't get their press passes. Isn't this against the First Amendment and against the law as we understand it? Well, so I think it is. It's certainly against it's a pretty clear free speech issue that would go. I mean, I think this could go eventually up to the federal Supreme Court, the way it was decided and the significance of this issue. At the same time, there's an argument to be made, and this is the argument that the Democrats will use in this case, is you still want to have the ability to restrict people from some of these situations if they're violent, if they're crazy, and crazy meaning in disruptive sort of way. If they're that way, you don't want them there. But what they've done is they being the Democrats have done is they've changed that sort of concept, and they've decided that they want the ability to restrict people they don't like from that position. Now, that doesn't prevent them from being a journalist, but obviously that's their goal, that they would have long range. But this specific access issue isn't that. But it does tread on this topic of First Amendment protections. It's a federal issue. We'll see where it goes, because it's going to have to go somewhere. Let's see. Somebody said their new bot. Yep, that's great. Let me try to get down to questions. Somebody mentioned Tennessee seems prepared compared to Idaho, and the answer to that is sort of. There's a lot of Republicans in Tennessee that don't really know why they're Republicans, and that's a big risk when you go into a red state. This seems to be the problem that I've noticed in Idaho, where people who, they probably would have been Democrats, they just ran as Republican because it was such a Republican state. Now they hold positions of significant power within the Republican Party, but they were never Republican in any belief or lifestyle or anything. I mean, they weren't conservative at all. And so when you have that type of weak and terrible people in the Republican Party in positions of power in that state, then you have zero protection for the same policies that we're suffering from in Washington. And that's a problem. Let's see. Jason Fisher, 1530. Is there any way to challenge the sheriff's control bill and what gun bills pass? Yes, there's always a way. The main thing is the initiative process is still one of the last things that exists out there. So I would think about that. Let's see. Tacky Man 2011. Regarding the income tax bill, could we sue legislators individually? You can always sue a legislator. I don't think that you're going to have standing to sue them because they voted on a tax bill that you didn't like, any more than you could you could sue a Republican for something that you didn't like that they voted on. So, oh man, there's so many questions, guys. I'm going to try to do my best here to go down this road here. Michael Case, 8231. Do you think the state will start pushing out non-compliant sheriffs before the midterm elections or after? Yeah, they're not going to do anything this year, other than maybe in Pierce County. They would try to go after Sheriff Swank, maybe. I don't think they would do anywhere else. The sheriffs they would target would be Klickitat, Adams, and Pierce. Maybe they would go after Walla Walla, and maybe they would go after. There's a couple sheriffs out there that they would probably want to go after if they thought they could get away with it. But I think they'd be kind of nervous about doing that initially. But who knows? But that's where they'd probably start. Let's see. Keep going down here. Tennessee, I can avoid the income tax. Yes, you can for now. And that's from Asmeric. who asked that. That's not really a question, but I responded to it anyway. Um, okay, so there's Craig Anderson, 2854. Do you guys remember the Christine Gregoire versus Dina Rossi race the Democrats cheated us out of? Yes, I do, and yes, they did cheat. Let's see. Tammy Anderson, 1649. I just found your news. Is this a friendly chat? Well, I think so. I think I'm a friendly guy, so hopefully it's a friendly chat. Breaking Bolts 8871. Did you happen to review the House amendment by Berg clarifying the exclusion of tribal income? No, I didn't actually. Thank you for pointing that out. I was going to go. I was aware of some of those amendments that were proposed. I thought the Republicans did a brilliant job with a lot of them, but that's not one that I noticed. So I'm going to go back and look at that. Yes, now then one, foreign and domestic. You are correct. Cage-TZ5UW. Question, what is a woman? Bonus question, what is a female? Can a definition be provided that includes women who had hysterectomies? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is, XX and XY chromosome questions and all this kind of stuff. What the heck is going on? I have kids in college right now that actually are learning science. They're not going to get soft degrees from colleges that focus on DEI, but it's a huge problem. Let's see. AZ Asnerick. I think it is time for Nick Shirley to come up here to show what is going on in Washington State. Absolutely. I mean, I'm hoping to meet with Nick before too long, but remember what Nick Shirley is really good at actually is repeating the stories that other people have put out there. And this doesn't take away from him at all. What I love is that he's getting that attention. And once somebody's gotten that kind of attention, they get a lot more attention. So we want to keep bringing in people, even if all they do is repeat the same story that I've done or that Ari Hoffman's done or that Brandy Cruz has done or Jonathan Cho or whoever or Jason Rance. If they just keep repeating it, it's like an amplification. And so if he does that, that'd be great. We've seen him in California, and he's rediscovering the fraud issues that many people have worked on down there and exposed in the past. I love it. If it gets more attention on it, I think it's great. And we need more of that. I'm trying to look down here. Isn't that amazing? This is Mark, I think Margathorn Smith 7497. Isn't that amazing? My comment is too long. Well, I don't know what comment it is. Let's see. Now then one. How about Washington clean up our own mess? I agree. We should. Now then one, calling on the 455,000 veterans that live and vote in sanctuary state Washington. Yes, we need them to vote. Cage TZ5UW, honest question. I think I answered your question earlier. Marge Thorne Smith 7497. King Bob is trying to make it so that it's financially solvent in order to succeed from the union. Oh, secede from the union and make it a new country, making him king. Yeah, I don't know. I just think that's kind of funny. Let's see. It's all delusional. It's all a delusional chess game. Yeah. Could be. If you're in the Democrat Party, I would certainly feel that way right now. The state income tax is just, I think it's actually suicidal on the Democrat Party's part, but we'll see what happens. I'm trying to get down here. I miss Dory Monson. This is Craig Anderson, 2854. I miss him too. He's a great guy. Many people don't realize Dory Monson's assistant is actually the person who helps Brandy Cruz. So there's a little bit of continuity there, just so you know. Let's see. Was Corey Monson once long ago a governor here in Washington State? And the answer to that is no. This is Dundrew 1342. Corey Monson, I think you mean Dory Monson. He was not a governor, although he was a great talk show host who grew up in the mean streets of Ballard. Let's see. As Nurek, Fitzpatrick needs to win governor in Idaho. Little is a sellout for sure. Yeah, it could be. I'm I've interacted a lot with the Republicans out there and been tremendously unimpressed mostly. And I'm mostly concerned because there's a apathy and laziness on the Republicans that I've met out of Idaho and Wyoming and South Dakota and North Dakota and Texas and a lot of states that I've tried to do activism work with and gone out and talked to. And I just don't think they're that serious because I don't think they recognize the risk factor in gateway legislation and policies that they seem to be willing to accept. Let's see, really interface, or reality interface, I think is what that is. Are we in touch with J.D. Vance about the fraud here? Yeah, I mean, he's aware of it. But again, there are 50 states in America, and 27 of them are fraud riddled. And probably another 10 or 15 are almost as bad, And so, I mean, look at the feds are having to sue Utah right now. Utah, one of the more conservative, supposedly, Republican states in America, they're refusing to open their voter rolls and expose how problematic their voter rolls are. And we have seen problems in the voter rolls in Utah before. It's run by Republicans. There are problems there. And the fact that they aren't willing to open it up means, I know it means they want to cover them up just as much as the Steve Hobbs and the Democrats want to cover up the problems with our state. It's not much different. And that is the reason why there's no place to run. We just have to simply defeat it. Reality interface. What do you think the end game is for the new bills to let illegals be law enforcement, eliminate sheriffs who are elected? I don't know. I mean, the end game there is just to make life more miserable, to add a level of chaos and confusion and problems into the law enforcement. There's definitely some issues there. Let's see, Rebecca Anderson, 2302. Why do voters keep passing school bonds and levies? Don't people track the poor academic performances? The answer to that is no. Most of the time they don't. And that's why levies pass, because they're ignorant. The people are generally ignorant about just how bad the local school system is. You also have incredibly low participation rate. When I was on the school board, when I would go to WASDA, and I'm going to kind of close with this, I think, a little bit here today because I know I've gone a little bit long on this, but this is something to remember. The consultants would come in and they'd put a class on how to win a school levy. It was intended as classes for school boards who want to pass levies or bonds. And they're slightly different. Bonds and levies have different thresholds of passage based on the fights that occurred with activists in Washington State back in the 20s and 30s, led mostly by initiatives and then ultimately convincing the legislature to change the state constitution. They made the levy passage threshold much higher and the minimum participation rate to pass those levies also higher. And so one of the interesting things that happened, the bond is still there. So 60% in order to pass a bond. And the theory being that you're going to stick something on somebody's property tax as a cost for 30 years, right, or 20 years, depending on how long the bond's been set up. Therefore, it needs to be a higher threshold of public support in order for it to go through. And so decent percentage of the bonds don't succeed. Then you have the levy. The levy has been interpreted as a way for local communities to support their schools a little bit more with property taxes to allow them to have special programs like music or sports or other things. That's the theory and how it's supposed to be done. Over the years, of course, the levy has been largely pushed into supporting more teachers, higher pay for teachers, try programs, all kinds of stuff. And so levies become now a key operating condition for most of these school districts within the boundaries of how big they can get them. The problem that's happening now is obviously school districts are failing in most measurable ways in the effort to educate kids in the way that most people would imagine education to be. But it also compounded by the fact that in most school districts, rarely do more than 20% of the households, usually it's around 15 to 18% of them, actually have kids in their homes who attend the school. Now, those parents are usually more motivated because they got Johnny in the school and he wants to play in the football team and he wants to travel for band and he wants to do these other events. And the levy, at least, is sold to them as the only way to keep those programs alive. And so those parents are motivated, usually, at least when their kids are in school, to get those levies passed. To some extent, their grandparents would also be in that category. And then you also have people who work at the school district. Now, these are highly incentivized populations that would push it. That's a decent subset of the population in that community. However, you have a lot of people that don't have that personal connection to the school district. And so, but they're also the people who oftentimes don't vote because that's not something that seems to matter to them because we have a February or an April vote on levies frequently. Those are the two dates that are usually used. And so when the ballot or when the ballot shows up, they just don't vote, or they think it doesn't matter, or they have low participation rate. And these consultants would come to WASDA and present to a class about how to pass a levy or a bond. And one of the things that they said is that if you gave any of them $1,500 and a little bit of time, they could defeat any levy. That was their argument. And the reason is that people rarely run campaigns against levies. If you did, it will usually lose. Most levies will fail if you run a campaign against it, because you're going to provide information to people that mostly they're not aware of. And generally, levies are run in a vacuum. They're the only thing out there, and the only people talking about them are the people who support them. If you get people to run campaigns against them during the time that they're on the ballot, during that election time or ahead of that time, and those people hit prepared, they don't look like clowns. They aren't out there saying dumb stuff, but they're just simply presenting the collapsing test scores, the increasing number of crazy teachers, the stupid woke programs that school's implementing, whatever. They can defeat the levy. You see the levy in Yelm's defeated 4 times in a row recently, and people are going to be paying a lot less in property taxes. The Yelm School District, in fact, may actually go under. You see the Battleground School District as well losing. You saw the Pasco School District lose their levy recently. And they're trying to run it again, but these levies are failing because people are starting to wake up. And the more people that wake up about the failures of the public school system, and really I think it's keyed on this, not just collapsing scores, but the abuse during COVID, the squandering and wasting of the resources that they get, and the wokester ideology that is not similar to what people mostly want. Then anyway, we'll see what happens. I think it's going to end up you'd find a lot of these levies losing, but it does take work to get out there and do it. Mostly is there's ignorance behind it, and that's what happens. All right, guys, listen, I'm going to get going here. I've been on this. This has been a long live stream. Didn't mean for it to go that long. I got videos I'm supposed to get done tonight or tomorrow, depending on how much I get my act together. And I very much look forward to our next live stream, which will be back on Tuesday next week. That's my plan. And by that time, the session will be over, and we'll have a much better idea of exactly where we're at in this process. I hope that people are aware that the future belongs to those who show up. And right now, we need a lot of people showing up over this next year or two, and especially in the elections coming up this year. We need a lot of support out there pushing back on some of the craziness, because if you want these red states to survive, we're ultimately going to have to win here in Washington as well. So the future does belong to those who show up, guys. Thank you guys so much for showing up. I'll try to show up more often myself, and we just got a lot of work to do. So look forward to seeing you next time.